You know you got a good theme song when the engineer in the studio is just bopping along with them. My thanks to the guys from Love and Reverse for allowing me to do that now for over 2 years. God bless them for that. Hey, it's the A Game. I'm Rob Acampora. Welcome to your Sunday brunch. Chris, before we even get started, I introduce my guest. Scroll up a little bit because I need this photo in a second. The A Game being brought to you in part today by Endless Words Media, who have released the debut book of Jim Law's If Feelings Were Words. It's a look inside a man's life through poetry and short stories. Feelings and emotions of love, loss, fear, anxiety, and back to love, found in this well-received book that is now available through Amazon, Apple, and any other outlet that you find your favorite book. Oh my God, I remember how to do a commercial. Holy crap. And I say this because this is a man who I worked with very intimately in Wilmington, Delaware at WSCW and WDEL. Dave Walls left there and has become the sports anchor du jour, photo number 3, plugged to ABC 13 out in Virginia, specifically, Lynchburg and Roanoke and all the things that are going on there. And there's a lot going on there right now because there's a lot of buzz about one guy. And Dave, I'm happy to say, is sort of an expert in this because if we go to photo number 5, this is the university. Liberty and the Flames are all abuzz about their quarterback, Malik Willis, who's going to be going into the NFL draft next week. The question is where? We're going to dive into that. We got 4 quarters to get into. Dave, thank you, by the way, for taking some time out of your busy schedule to do this today.
You know, Rob, it's the first time I've talked to you where the world hasn't been on fire from a pandemic or sports haven't been canceled. So it's nice to be talking to you under some good circumstances.
Oh, absolutely. And this is some wild circumstances in my book. Malik Willis, Chris, give me photo number 2. Obviously, his breakout, I believe, was right here. He was doing the warm-ups for the Senior Bowl, and he really kind of came to the attention of everybody else, where some people knew about him from the year before, not necessarily this past season. But this past season wasn't bad. But this was a guy who people have talked about as, well, maybe a second-round pick. And now all of a sudden, he is the most talked-about player coming into the draft next week. Since you've covered him, for people who may not know, what are some of the things that people are not talking about when it comes to Malik Willis that they should know about?
Okay. Well, first of all, Malik is let's start with off the field. Personality-wise, you know, for someone at Liberty University, you know, there's a lot of people who do the eye roll and go, oh, sure, he's a Christian. Great. You know, and having covered Liberty University football now for, you know, hard to believe, close to a decade now.
Yeah.
You know, I can tell you there are players who, you know, while on the field or off field, they may say the right things, but they don't do the right things. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
He is as genuine a person as you're going to see on or off the field. So if you're looking for a player with the character side, you've got it 100%, you know. But as far as on the field goes, you know, this is a guy who, for all his talent and ability, really, I don't want to say stumbled onto the right opportunity for him, but you know, there was a point in time where his college career didn't even happen the way he thought. You know, he was recruited. He transferred in his senior year out of high school to Roswell High School, which is a bigger high school in the Atlanta area. He took him to the state championship game, and he signed to Virginia Tech, not as a quarterback.
I see. I didn't know that, actually.
Yeah, Virginia Tech was very high on him, but at that time, their depth chart was already full with 4 or 5 quarterbacks, one of whom was a 5-star QB that Justin Fuente, you know, had his eye on, said, well, we're going to move you to safety. And he said, well, okay. And then he's like, I really want to play quarterback. So Tech, you know, let him go, and Auburn went there. But of course, then they had Bo Nix, and he was in a 1-2 fight there. And even though he dazzled during spring camps and dazzled during spring games, he just never really got that opportunity in Auburn. And he kind of thought, you know, I don't know if this thing's going to happen. Hugh Freeze admits he didn't know much about the guy, about Malik Willis, until he talked to his high school quarterback and said, all right, I'm willing to give you a shot. And until he stepped on the field for that very first game, he was in a quarterback battle the entire way. And it wasn't until he started to prove himself on the field in the 2020 season, that he really started to make that name for himself. So his journey to, you know, being a prominent figure now in ready to probably be in a first-round draft pick was never guaranteed until he really started showing those results on the field.
A little side irony, you mentioned Bo Nix, and now Bo Nix is transferred to Oregon after all this. So he loses out to Bo Nix, and now Bo Nix not even at Auburn, which is kind of a wild scenario. You talk about the 2020 season. I mean, that was a breakout year. Liberty came out of literally nowhere to go 10-1, come up with some big wins. I mean, you're beating Virginia Tech in one of the wildest games of the year and the wildest ending probably we've ever seen. You had a rough 1-point loss to NC. You were 1 point, actually technically 2 points away from a perfect season. You beat Syracuse. You wound up beating one of the most talked about teams of that season in Coastal Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
So in one way, this put Liberty from where they were here as a now developing Division I program to suddenly going, hi, we're now getting your attention. We just went 10-1 and finished in the top 25. This season may not have gone completely the way you want. 8-5 is not a bad year, but I think the expectations maybe by some of the critics were probably saying this team probably should have been better than 8-5. So did that hurt Malik a little bit where some of the critics have been saying, well, he's technically not a first-round pick? And we're going to dive a little more into that, but just based on that level of looking at it.
I think on the surface, you can clearly take your knocks and say, well, Liberty capitalized on a pandemic season where not everybody was playing and X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
And I get that. And I think Malik will be the first to tell you he didn't always have his best year. He had, after only having, I forget the number, but some minuscule number of interceptions in 2020,
Yes.
1 or 2 in the regular season, if that. He had, I remember 2 weeks in a row where he had a 3 interception game.
I was about to say he had 3 games where he had 3 interception games, 2 back-to-back. Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah. Oh, but if you dive a little deeper, Liberty had some tremendous problems this year with injuries to the offensive line. So that protection he had in 2020 was absolutely nowhere in 2021. So if you take that and you combine it with some injuries in some other skill positions, some wide receivers, one of his favorite targets, Noah Frith, was hardly around in 2021. Caleb Yarborough, who was dynamite in 2020, had a medical exemption and actually left the game of football. And so you take away his top 2 targets, and now he's left to scramble, figure it out, and it makes you appreciate those 8 wins even more. In those 8 wins, he had to dazzle. He had to scramble, and he showed off his improved arm strength the entire way. So I think if you look at the entirety of who was playing, the personnel he had around him, those 8 wins stand out to me just as much as those 10. And still, by the end of the season, when they got to that bowl game, they completely dominated Eastern Michigan, and I was on the sideline for that. That one was never in question. That there's very few games in college where you can say at halftime, this one's over. I'm in my car editing the highlights, heading back to the hotel room, ready for the press conference. I mean,
it's funny you bring that up because almost in a weird way that didn't help Malik, where a bowl game probably would have helped him, but playing a team like Eastern Michigan, who you completely dominated, it still raised the question. We still don't know if Malik Willis is the real deal. And then came the combine, the NFL combine, where he put on a show. I mean, I'm watching this on TV, and I'm like going, is there not a throw he can't make? I mean, he was just brilliant. He didn't have to run the 40. I mean, I know he didn't do that. And for people who don't know, there were word that came out of Auburn a few years earlier that he was running sub 4.4, like 4.38, 4.36. So, no, we already know he's fast. There's no question he's got the speed. The athleticism, you can see it on the highlight films. But the arm, at the combines, that was the thing that all of a sudden every scout was going, if we didn't know who he is, we now know who he is now.
Oh, absolutely. And I think he approached this offseason leading up to the draft in the perfect way possible. He sat down and listed out, what are my weaknesses? What are the things I need to work on to be ready for the NFL game? Not just things I need to work on, the things that these scouts are looking for.
Right.
His footwork, his arm strength and his accuracy. Again, if you're looking from the outside, you see those 3 interception games, you go, boy, can this kid really hit the target when he's under pressure?
Right.
And he took that, and by the time he dazzled somewhat in the Senior Bowl, which ironically was the same stadium where his bowl game was down in Mobile, Alabama.
Right.
So for twice, he had a level of comfort going into that bowl game, to that Senior Bowl, that I don't think anybody else even had, because he'd already just dominated on this field. You get through the combine, and we saw some amazing throws from there. And then by the time he came to his pro day here in Lynchburg, which, pro days for Liberty Flames, generally you'll get, 1 or 2 scouts, maybe a coach here or there. This was shut the town down. This was, oh, hey, Mike Tomlin's over at the bar. Then over there, we got Matt Rule, who's talking with people. And when I say there had to be over 100 scouts, I met basically everybody from the Washington Commanders front office.
Oh, wow.
They were packed shoulder to shoulder. And yes, there were other Liberty players that are working out. I don't want to slight them if they're watching. Hi, guys. But at the same time, we all know who they were there to see. And boy, the footwork improved, the accuracy. And at the same time, it never looked like the pressure even got to him. You want to talk about a cool customer with the entire league basically watching, with NFL broadcasting your workout live.
Yeah.
He was joking around, having fun. He hit a long touchdown pass. He's running down the field going, hey, guys, we got this one. I mean, what's not to like, and what doesn't impress you by someone who can handle that kind of pressure in just a short amount of time.
That's the one thing I did notice. The critics said the smile. He was constantly smiling, and they're not used to that sometimes from some of these kids. And he looked like he was, like you said, shining in a moment where there's pressure, but eating it up and kind of going, this is what I've been working for. I'm so glad I'm having this moment.
Absolutely. And, the other thing that I admired from the outside was he could have had a private workout and said, I want the spotlight just to be on me. He actually, held off on some of his stuff at the combine. So that way, if these scouts really wanted to see what he could do, they'd have to come to Lynchburg, and they'd also have to take a look at his teammates.
Right.
In fact, the other funny thing about this was Virginia Tech wide receiver Trey Turner, who very well could be a middle round draft pick, 2 or 3.
Right.
Virginia Tech was also doing their pro day on the same day. He did both Virginia Tech's and Liberty's pro day, because Virginia Tech's quarterback situation is a little, they're going through some things right now with the new coach and changing things up. And so those two, Willis and Turner, became friends at the Senior Bowl. He said, I want to throw with you. And they said, okay. So there's a Trey Turner running around Liberty University taking passes from Malik Willis. And that's how big of an event, though, that this was. He said, I got to be a part of what Malik is doing and what Liberty is doing. And boy, what a fun day that was.
It sounds like it.
Yeah.
Boom or bust. That's the term I see in a couple of these when I watch CBS Sports Network or some of the other mock drafts. When it comes to Malik Willis, I keep hearing boom or bust. To me, just because of his athleticism, he's going to find a role in the NFL no matter what. The question becomes, can he become the top-tier quarterback? And when you look at where this draft is going, and we look at the teams that are being talked about, Carolina at number 6 clearly needs a quarterback. We know Atlanta at number 8 in the future, outside of Mariota, could use their future quarterback.
Right.
Go to Seattle at number 9. Right now it's Locke and Geno Smith. And they're both on 1-year contracts. So I'd say, yeah, they're looking for their future quarterback. The one team that seems to be an interesting one, and Chris, if you can scroll down and give me photo number 1, I'm going to go to the big board here, thanks to the Draft Network's Jamie Eisner, who says that Pittsburgh right now is the odds-on favorite at number 20 to take Malik. Now, Dave, the way this is looking, I don't see Malik dropping the 20, knowing full well that we're looking at other teams that could have a need at the quarterback position. Now, traditionally, you say if you're drafting a person that high, you want to get some output out of him the first year. They figure, well, if he's being drafted that high, he should start. Right. But I refer back 2 years ago to the San Francisco 49ers, who gave up a lot to get Trey Lance, pick number 3, did not start for the San Francisco 49ers last year, and still may not start for the San Francisco 49ers. So where do you think in the middle of this, first off, where do you think he's going to go? Well, let's start with this. What would be the best situation for Malik Willis going into this draft? What team do you think would be the best play for him to land on?
The best team?
Yeah.
I know Pittsburgh is super, super high on him. And
there's a real plus, yeah.
Yeah, Mike Tomlin hasn't come out and said, this is our guy, this is who we want. But clearly, the man spent a couple days in Lynchburg talking to him. He's had his eye on him through the Senior Bowl, through the Combine. Everybody knows that Pittsburgh really wants him as a part of their staff. Right. Carolina would be an interesting option. Matt Rule has slowly kind of crept into the conversation here.
Yes.
And a little sneaky. The one that's been kind of stealthy that it's kind of it's always a warning to me when a player, goes home, especially in the pros, but, Atlanta is sitting out there as well going, boy, he's someone that we could take. And, nobody's really expecting much from us right now, take a year to develop. And, that would be a great option there at number 9. But clearly, Malik is not going to be sitting around at 20 for Pittsburgh to draft. So if that happens, Pittsburgh's going to have to make that wager, if you will, and put a package together. And I think that's the only hurdle standing in front of them. But clearly, they would need a dance partner in order to. And I wouldn't count out the Detroit Lions either. Malik at the Senior Bowl was being coached by Detroit Lions staff. And when I say they couldn't stop singing his praises enough for days afterwards, and then they had 4 or 5 representatives come to the pro day in Lynchburg, and again couldn't stop singing his praises, and were watching intently to the very last throw. Detroit, I think could be right in the mix as well. The other question is he like you said, is he someone that you want to see starting in year 1, or do you want him to give him that half season to a year to kind of sit, be mentored, and look, Detroit might work in that option where you at least have a Jared Goff, someone who has some form of playoff success,
yes,
to mentor you, but at the same time, you be ready for your shot. Or do you have that kind of faith in Malik right now that whatever errors are there still in his game, that he'll figure them out on the field, and you have enough strong pieces around him? And I think each club's got to kind of answer that. For me, I kind of am expecting either Pittsburgh to trade up, or I would bet Atlanta takes him if he slips down to maybe like a number 9.
Now I'm going to play my theory based on that. If Pittsburgh is going to get Malik Willis, obviously you're going to have to say to yourself, the number 1 pick in 2023, you're going to have to invest. You're going to have to say, I've got to put this pick. So now you also have to say, I've got to trade beyond the 9th and potentially on top of the 6th pick and get beyond Carolina. Suddenly, phone call to number 5 with the New York Giants. The Giants have the 5th and 7th pick, probably more willing than any other team to trade a pick in the top 5. I think the Jets have 2 players they really want in Gardner and Thibodeau. So I don't see them moving because they think they can get, whether it's 4-10 with Gardner Thibodeau or Thibodeau Gardner 4-10, they think they got their guys. So the Giants, my pick, if Pittsburgh's going to make a deal, it's got to be with the Giants at number 5, and you're going to pay a price. The Detroit angle for a second. The thing that hurts Detroit is at 2, because the way the draft's been massaging, now suddenly Trayvon Walker could be the number 1 pick. Suddenly Aiden Hutchinson. If Aiden Hutchinson's there at number 2, there's no chance Detroit takes him. Because I think they're going to sit there and go, the Michigan guy from down the road playing for the Detroit Lions, forget it. They're going to do that. But I think the odds increase if Aiden's off the board. If Jacksonville plays along the line of Aiden Hutchinson's considered the best player available at number 1, then Detroit sits there at number 2 and says, all right, now we have to think about it. The sleeper, in my opinion, is the New Orleans Saints, who went out of their way to pick a pick from the Philadelphia Eagles. You've already invested, and you probably thought before, like even 2 weeks ago, maybe there's a chance Malik's going to be there right around the 15th, 16th pick. Now, all of a sudden, as we're talking about this, do the Saints say, we're in for a penny, let's go all the way, and maybe have to give up both number 1s to get the pick, and sit behind Jameis Winston and Andy Dalton for a year before he gets there. This is why this is so intriguing about Malik Willis. Everybody, like you said, Pittsburgh seems to have the biggest, we want this kid at all costs. So I understand why we see from the Draft Network, why they're putting them as the odds-on favorite. Oh, one more thing. Atlanta needs a wide receiver. I mean, that's a tough thing. If Atlanta drafts him at 9, wouldn't be shocked. But Atlanta lost their top wide receiver due to a suspension. You're going to probably find a receiver in the second round, but there's a top 3 of receivers, and then there's another level. So if you're willing to sacrifice a little bit of level to get Malik Willis, like I said, this is the great thing about what's going on with Malik. He will be the talk for the next week, and so many proposed trades. I think we're going to see rumors flying about. But I like your hypothesis on this.
The other quarterback that I think is still in the mix, aside from Malik Willis, is Sam Howell from UNC. Because those two really were side by side for most of that Senior Bowl, and really, if one had a flaw, the other one was a little bit better, trying to outdo one another. I think Malik Willis' stock just went up a little bit more, but there's still some teams that, if they, I don't want to say they want the safe option, but they definitely want the option they know a little more, because UNC is probably a little more publicly available, and their fans know about Sam Howell a little bit more. And I think a lot has been made out of his hand size, his performances in cold weather a little bit, but he's one heck of a competitor. And if the only way I don't see Malik going first as a quarterback is if someone like a Carolina, let's be honest, we were talking about Detroit wanting to pick the guy from Michigan. Well, ticket sales and fan support is a thing. And if Carolina all of a sudden has a UNC quarterback team, I mean, good night. The ticket sales for if no other reason would be high there as well. So I could see that scenario playing out, but those are my top 2, and then Zap from Kentucky,
Western Kentucky,
probably late first round, early second round in my eyes.
It's interesting you bringing up Sam Howell, because he's the one that in the last week has literally been taken as low as the 50s to as high as 6. His stock continues to go up and down, and there's an interesting similarity. You were talking about the injuries that Malik Willis had to deal with. Sam Howell had to deal with a lot of seniors that left the team. This year they went 6 and 7. No, his passing percentage wasn't as good as the first 2 years, but suddenly his ground game, he ran for over 900 yards and had to improvise on he really showed that element of his game. He is another one of those guys that it shows you how crazy this draft is with the quarterbacks, where I have seen mock drafts where they say no quarterbacks in the first round to up to 5 in the first round. I get why there's positives and negatives. Sam Howell, if there is a negative, it's because the team went 6 and 7. And you sit there and say, do you draft a quarterback who didn't even have a winning record?
Yeah.
But if you look at some of the intangibles, I get it. It's the same thing where we talk about Kenny Pickett. His hand size is the thing that's driving him. Now suddenly I saw a mock draft where he's fallen to the second round when everybody has said he's a first-round caliber pick. So the way this quarterback draft is going, the only sure thing, I mean, that we can say Malik will go in the first round. Everybody else, I don't know.
Yeah, and you made a great point with UNC because I cover the ACC as well, the Virginia Tech. Right. I've had a chance to see UNC a couple times this year, and you're absolutely right. Howell's performance this year, I thought on a one-on-one basis was almost better than what he did a year ago, simply because he did not have that level of personnel around him. And the season opener, which was a Friday night game against Virginia Tech, I mean, his passes were on the money. He had so many drops. They'd finally complete something, and then you'd have a holding call, get called back. And, I mean, by the fourth quarter, the man looked like he wanted to put his head through a plate glass window. I mean, he was just that level of frustrated because he was doing things to move this team into position to score, to get them here and there. And then, one thing would lead to another. And that was kind of a story a lot of the way this season for UNC, but it wasn't because of Howell. And because of Pickett, you're right. Depending on who you talk to, his stock is either way up or way down. And I mean, we know this isn't maybe the strongest QB class we've ever seen, but it's almost like some people don't yet have a feel for his abilities and what he can or can't do yet. And when I talk about hand size, I apologize. I was, of course, talking about Pickett, but, and the cold weather. But, clearly he's shown he can win in the big games, and I think, somebody's going to take a gamble on him, maybe, like you said, late first round, early second round, and, get a steal. I'd be shocked if he slips down to 50, like you were saying. That number would shock me a little bit, but I mean, heck, Dan Marino from Pitt slipped down to the end of the first round. So who the heck knows?
We need to go back to the ghost of Ken O'Brien, who was drafted ahead of Dan Marino.
Ken O'Brien. We still remember Ken O'Brien.
Yes, exactly. Jets fans will never forget that moment. We had Marino, we took Ken O'Brien. I know Ken went to a couple of Pro Bowls, actually led the league in passing one year, but he wasn't Dan Marino. Sorry, we had to get that off my chest.
I know, I understand.
Wrapping up this segment, give me a prediction. How many quarterbacks will be taken in the first round in your mind?
I think we're going to get 2. I think we're going to get Howell, and I think we're going to get Malik. Take whatever order you want. I would still be surprised if Malik goes any lower than 15. I still think Pittsburgh is the highest on him. I think they're going to put forth some sort of package. If they can't get that some sort of package, I say he goes top 10. I think Atlanta's there to scoop him up. Yes, they need a wide receiver, but to have a franchise quarterback in your pocket who's a hometown guy, means a lot. And, there is some decent wide receiving talent, and it could be just a year where Malik develops, waits until they're able to get that wide receiving talent in the future. So I'd be shocked if he goes any less than 15, but, that's why draft night's fun.
Exactly. Here's my wild prediction to wrap up this segment. Going with 4, and here's my reasoning. I do believe somebody's going to trade up for Malik Willis. I see that coming. The surprise here, and this is when I thought about it, when you're talking about Howell potentially going to the Carolina Panthers. Carolina doesn't have a second, third, or fourth round pick in this draft. Does it behoove them to trade down, maybe get some draft picks and say, Howell maybe there later in the first round? So why not trade down, recoup some draft picks, fill the holes that way, go with Howell? I could see that.
I like that.
Kenny Pickett will find his way into the first round somewhere. Whether Pittsburgh doesn't trade up, they're going to settle for Kenny Pickett, which is still not a bad thing to settle for. Or maybe Detroit becomes that team at 32 to say, we want the extra year on the quarterback, we'll go with Kenny Pickett. The sleeper, I think, is going to be the fourth quarterback. Somebody from the second round will put together a package to trade back in the first round to get Ritter out of Cincinnati. I think, again, you talk about athleticism, you talk about the 40 time, you talk about the arm. The funny thing, you were talking about footwork. That's the big rap against Ritter. It's the footwork. But footwork is something that can be fixed. You can't you either got the arm strength or you don't. You either have the speed or you don't. Footwork is something they can work on. So that's why I'm thinking, because you want that extra year, somebody from the second round will trade late into the first round to get Ritter. So I'm going to go with 4 as my prediction.
Yeah, Ritter has kind of quietly crept into the conversation here in the last couple of weeks. And the more I've seen out of, like you said, his intangibles like that, I'm impressed. So I could see that playing out as a late first round kind of steal that would work out. And then, like I said, the kid from was it Western Kentucky is Zapp?
Bailey Zapp. I mean, the guy had ridiculous numbers: 6,000 yards and 62 touchdowns in a year. I mean, some people are gonna say the system, but anybody who says the system, I point to Mike White of the Jets, who came out of that same system and single-handedly won a game against the Bengals off the bench. So you have to have some talent to run that system.
And he had a dynamite Senior Bowl. To be honest with you, if Malik Willis isn't there, we're talking about
Bailey Zapp. You're right,
Bailey Zapp. I thought he did a lot of great things. Just maybe got a little bit overshadowed by being on a team with Sam Howell and Malik Willis. But that's going to happen when you've got that powerful of a depth chart. But still, did some nice things, and I'd expect him to go as well. But yeah, 4 is a very reasonable number. Heck, if somebody's feeling QB happy, you could go up to 5, but I would expect him to slip probably to the second round.
Get ready for some fun next week with the NFL draft. Here with Dave Walls from ABC 13 in Virginia here on the A Game to the second quarter. And he mentioned he covers the ACC. He watches a lot of football, also watches a lot of basketball. The ACC this year took its lumps and yet got the last laugh at the NCAA tournament, putting 3 in the Elite 8, 2 in the Final 4. When you look back on the season and how it ended, did the ACC get back some respect? Because it seemed like the critics were just killing the conference all year, basically saying there's Duke and there's nobody else.
Yeah, I think they got a lot of respect back, and even in the areas where the conference, took those deserved lumps. Virginia had one of those years where, we know what a Tony Bennett team looks like, plenty of defense, a little bit of scoring, but my goodness, there were some days where they were happy to crack 40. And you go, oh my gosh, I love showing highlights of blocks and steals, but Tony, you got to give me a bucket,
I got to interrupt you on that because you bring up Virginia. I mean, did that loss to Navy out of the gate really just set the tone a little bit, or was it just kind of you sit there and say, okay, it's a Tony Bennett hiccup. The defense didn't come to play. Navy shot the hell out of the ball from 3-point range. We'll shake it off. But it seemed like it took them a while to shake it off from that game. Am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong at all. This senior class, with the exception of Kihei Clark, who we've all seen going back to the national championship team, really had not established much of an offensive personality. They had taken on that, we could play defense better than anybody. We could shut almost anybody down. And that's great. But then, you got maybe Reese Beekman. But, other than that, the consistent point scoring wasn't there on a night-by-night basis. The nights they would win, somebody would step up, have a big 20-point game, but then the next night, 2, right. Or they're on the bench and they never even make it into the game. So there was certainly lots of frustrations. But then again, they go down to Duke. They get the buzzer beater at Duke, and they almost beat them in Charlottesville. Really, we're talking about a couple of free throw shots away from sweeping the regular season series against a very talented Blue Devils team. So very frustrating. But as far as the conference as a whole, like you said, they took some very deserved lumps, but I argue that it was a case of they were beating themselves up more, in these interconference battles than they really were taking lumps from the outside. Once you get to these upper echelon teams, UNC and Duke just beat the bejesus out of each other, and every time they played each other. Virginia Tech was in a lot of these games. To be honest, they went through a terrible slump going through late January into February.
That's why I thought they were the least likely team to kind of come up and have that run and win the ACC tournament. I mean, that was a great story going into the NCAA tournament, that the only way Tech could get in, having that run. And in a weird way, as you've covered both Virginia schools, does Virginia Tech get the nod as having the better year over Virginia this year based on that? Or if you kind of just say, look, overall, if we look at both teams and the body of work, maybe it's about even?
I think it's easy to say, oh, they won the conference championship, they had the better year.
Yeah.
Take that out of it. I think, they both had their slumps. They both had their high points. I would argue that Virginia Tech had a better resume than Virginia. I think that even if Virginia somehow, some way had won the ACC tournament, they'd come through and blitz everybody. Virginia Tech was a 11 seed, 12 seed. I argue Virginia might have been slightly lower than that. Their body of work, I know it's hard to imagine a Tony Bennett team coming in as a 13 or something, but their body of work throughout the rest of the year, other than Duke, just didn't stand up. But Virginia Tech, had their moments. And honestly, some of those losses in that, that long slump they had where they dipped to under 500 in conference play and were dead last at one point. Miami throws up, a 3-quarter buzzer beater from beyond half court to win at the buzzer.
Right.
And there was some 2-point losses, 3-point losses, or just losses where they go cold in the last 3 minutes of the game and the other team goes on a little spurt to beat them. There weren't a lot of blowouts in that slump. And I would argue that Tech, was competitive down to the end, whereas some of those Virginia losses, again, when you're talking about you're having trouble cracking 50 points on a night, defensively, that's great if you keep them at 60, but if you can't score, what's the point? So I would argue that Virginia Tech, at least, when they rode those waves, their lows weren't quite as low, and you felt like they were still always in the game because of the talent level they had.
It's funny, you were mentioning Miami, and you were talking about Virginia Tech with the close losses. Miami is a great example of that. 7 of their losses, 6 points or less all year. People were surprised that this team made the Elite Eight. But if you take those close losses, that 26-11 record could have easily been 30-7 or 31-6 if a couple games break one way or the other. So in a weird way, like going back to the point you're saying, in the ACC, everybody's beating each other up so badly that maybe getting the respect is, unfortunate. But then Miami proved they were so battle tough that when they came to the tournament, I was shocked as anybody. I mean, I never doubt Larangara as a coach because what he did at George Mason years ago, still one of the best moments to watch a team from the Colonial Conference come up and make the tournament. It was like the first wave of shocking Final Fours that we saw over the next decade or two that popped up. And Larangara has just quietly done this really nice job of the Miami program. This is obviously the height of the program. And they could have been even better. That's the funny part. When you start looking closer into the numbers, and like you said, the close losses, some of these teams were really, and the why they were battle tested, why we saw 3 in the Elite Eight, probably. They were so battle tested that they were ready for the moment when the moment happened.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel for him because the Miami program doesn't maybe get the fan support that others in the ACC do. In fact, had a colleague go to the Watsco Center down there in Miami to cover that Virginia Tech Miami game. And I think a tip-off, I think the arena was maybe a quarter full. You could have bought a general admission ticket and walked them in courtside, and it was a great game, and his teams, middle of the road record or top of the road record are always fighting. They're one of the tougher teams, I would argue, to play in the ACC. And he always, we've kind of seen the building. Yes, the Final Four run here definitely surprised me as well. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I called that, but at the same time, if you watch the way the program has been built over the last few years, he's done it through toughness, through earning that respect against these other teams. You always know you're going to be in a fight against them. They've had the height, they've had the toughness, and are defensively as well. They don't give up easy baskets ever. So. Again, the run surprised me, but I wasn't surprised to see them pull away with a win or two. I had them going to the Sweet 16, and then anything beyond that was a bonus.
North Carolina, I did not see that coming. I really didn't. I mean, this was a tale of two seasons for them. I mean, they were a lackluster 12-6 to start the season, and you kind of felt like, okay, here's Coach Davis trying to go through the motions with this team, try to get them on, and then all of a sudden, it just started to click probably at the right time. 17-4 down the stretch. Heartbreaking loss in the final. I mean, I personally think they're in great hands for the future. You've got the rebounding machine on that team who's coming back next year, which I thought maybe he'd come out for the draft. I mean, to see Armando staying, I think is going to help them even more. I mean, does this team look like a team that, should have been an 8 seed in this tournament? And when you look toward next year, are they the prohibitive favorites in the ACC?
I can't argue with the 8 seed. I really can't if you take the whole season as a body of work there. But clearly, if you look at what they did over the last 2 to 3 weeks, even leading up to the ACC tournament, then maybe you make a case that, well, they should have been ranked a little bit higher. But take the season as a whole, I think 8 is probably good. But as far as are they set up for the future, Baycott coming back is you can't understate that enough. That was an amazing decision. It's rare that you see someone who has that kind of year at an elite program like a UNC not capitalize on it and say, I'm making a run at the NBA. So clearly it makes a good point.
Yeah, you're making a great point because I was reading an article recently. He said if it weren't for the new rules about the endorsements, he probably would have left to go to the NBA. He said that was a big reason. That change in the rules is the reason he wanted to stay for his senior year. And I'm sure North Carolina's sitting there going, thank you, after 99 rebounds in the NCAA tournament. I mean, this kid plays great defense. He's got a hell of a motor. And he is one of the – not that I expected him to, but we talked about this in previous podcasts. When it comes to the tournament, you get that one player you can strap the team behind their back, and somehow you can make a long run. Bacot is that kind of guy. He really is.
Absolutely, he is. And like you said, that motor has been there. I remember seeing him in the ACC tournament back in 2020, just before the pandemic hit.
Right.
And boy, he was ready to strap that team to his back too. Just as a youngster then. And now here we are in 2022, and you can see how much more he's matured. His toughness is double what it used to be. But yet he still got that shooting touch, defensive ability. I mean, he's the complete package, assuming, he heals up properly in the offseason and he's ready for another grind in the ACC this year. But yeah, you make a great point with the NIL, really opening up doors for some of these players to say, like, you know what, I don't have to make this jump right away. I can, be able to stay here for another year, develop my abilities a little bit more. And, oh, by the way, also make it back to the NCAA tournament and make a run at this thing. Yeah,
exactly. Dave, I'm going to wrap up this segment with the two teams in the ACC. And I think these are two teams that are really in a real flux position.
Mm-hmm.
Louisville had a disaster year. There's no other way to describe it. Kenny Payne coming back to his alma mater, taking over the program. The expectations can't be that great after a 13-19 year. What's realistic for Louisville? How long do you think it will take before Louisville becomes a top 25 team again?
At this point, it could take at least another year or two, because it all depends on the strength of how well are you able to recruit when you're 13 and 19.
Right.
Unless I have some sort of connection with the coach or with the Louisville area, is that a school, especially, with, I don't know, UVA, Tech, Duke, UNC, Miami sitting out there.
Yeah.
Is that a school that I want to go to, that I know I'm going to be able to play, have a chance to win, and also, let's be honest, in 2022, 23, get the exposure that I need in order to move my career, into the upper echelon. And I don't know that Louisville is there. I think they can be better next year than 13 and 19. I think they can get above 500 because, even though the record doesn't show it, a lot of those games were good games. Mm-hmm. But, I still think it takes a year or two. Anyone who says a team can magically turn around in 1 year doesn't see the recruiting and the classes and the work that goes into that turnaround process. So I wouldn't be looking for them in your bracket maybe next year to make a deep run. But, maybe we get 2 years down the road here, and I think they're in better position.
What about Syracuse? I mean, look, Boeheim, I think, is on the tail end of what has been an interesting career, but the tail end of his career has not gone probably the way he wanted. 16 and 17 this past year. It just seems like whatever that thing that Syracuse had is gone. It's got to be more difficult for Jimmy to probably recruit in the ACC against all these teams. I mean, can they become even a 25-win team, a tournament team that wins one game in the tournament? I'm not even asking them to be a Final Four team anymore. I'm saying, can they get back to that level with Boeheim still as the coach? There's the key term.
By the way, Boeheim has had the longest retirement tour than any pro boxer I've ever seen.
God, it's so true.
My goodness, how long have we been talking about? Well, this is his last year, and here we are. It's like, oh, that's been 5 years ago now.
Right. It's sort of like, the Eagles farewell tour, which has gone on for now, 10 years? Okay. And it got not complaining.
Let's do another reunion tour. Come on, let's bring the band back together. I think that 16 and 17 record is really deceptive, though. I mean, everybody can point to Buddy Boeheim having all these numbers, and that's great. Yeah. I think the rest of the team played solid enough where they were in a lot of those losses. And I mean, if you look back just a couple of years, right before Virginia won that national championship, I think you go back to 2017. That was a middle of the road team at best that made the NCAA tournament. Yet Boeheim had what it take to coach them up enough to have a second half comeback against UVA in the Elite Eight, make it to the Final Four, where nobody saw that run coming.
Right.
And is that magic there where they're going to be a 30-win team each year? Like you're saying, I don't think so. But again, he's still got that mystique where he's able to draw in some of these higher caliber players, especially from the upstate New York area. And so the potential is there for a turnaround. Will Boeheim be there for that? Who knows?
Yeah.
But I think this next era with Buddy, transitioning out, and the next generation of players is going to answer a lot, because I think Syracuse the last two years or so has really relied on Buddy Boeheim, and I think the rest of the team hasn't really shown much of what they can do yet. But on paper, and at least from what I see, during warmups on the bench and some of the smaller games, they've got some talent. So they can be there and they can compete. But I think this, like I said, the magic hasn't been there for a couple more years. I still think they have a chance to reclaim some of it. How far that takes them, I don't know. It's a little early.
Ranking the ACC to wrap this up. I mean, I still got to put the Big 12 as far as men's basketball conferences is number 1. I got the SEC 2. I think after the tournament, I got to put the ACC back up to number 3. I at one point had them at 5 coming into the season. Now, because of the tournament, I've got to kind of move them back up. And then I've got Big 10, Big East, Pac-12. Would you be on the same page or sort of a little different?
No, I think you're in the ballpark there. I think one of the big complaints we always hear from people who aren't in the region that I'm covering here in Virginia and North Carolina is that, ACC, Duke, North Carolina. But, I think if you take a look at the conference as a whole, 2/3 of this conference can play and make a run in the tournament. I mean, in truth, even Virginia with as mediocre of a year as they had. And, I don't think that's understating it at all. With the mediocre years they had, if they somehow had made the tournament, they can win a game or two. Their defense is good enough to frustrate anybody. Miami, was not their best year. Right. They go out there and they make a run. They make that deep run. UNC is an 8 seed. They make the finals. Duke with their squad makes the Final Four. And there's Syracuse wasn't bad. There's you take some of the lower tier teams out there like Louisville and Georgia Tech who have clearly struggled in recent years, but I'd argue 3/4 of that conference can make a run, or at least get a win in the tournament. And I don't know that there's too many other conferences other than the ones you just mentioned that can make that sort of claim. They might have a team or two that really stands out as, oh, wow, they got this 30-win season. They're going to make a deep run. Okay, well, what's seeds 3 through 8 in your conference look like? And I mean, and that's, I think if you're ranking conferences, I think you got to take a deeper look at that.
Yeah, and I think that the best way to defend that point is, as bad as Louisville was, they weren't as bad as Georgetown in the Big East. Yeah. And we will close the segment with that.
There you go.
Dave Walls, ABC 13 in Virginia here on the A Game. Third quarter. Let me get photo number 7. This may explain everything. This is a view from the stands of the USFL. And I know I'm being harsh here because they're bubbling the teams right now. And when the home team, quote-unquote home team, Birmingham Stallions have played their 2 games, they've at least drawn over 15,000 people. So there is hope in that sense. But we know in the last few years that the Alliance of American Football and the XFL couldn't even survive 1 year. Dave, it looks like the USFL will find a way to get through this season. But with the talk of the XFL next season, and when we talk about the money factor, because both of the other leagues have hemorrhaged money hand over fist, does the USFL have a chance to even get season 2 at this point?
The only way I see the USFL lasting is, quite frankly, do the TV partners want to keep it around?
Right.
Are the ratings there? Because, by the way, I understand why they're bubbling teams a little bit here in Birmingham, but how embarrassing is it to show a pro football league with 50 fans in the stands?
Exactly.
I mean, I've covered rec league baseball that has more people in the stands than the USFL. And, if you're throwing city names, behind like the Philadelphia Star, you're trying to rely on that nostalgia, which, by the way, you and I aren't in our 20s anymore. And I'm not going to lie, I don't remember the USFL. I was still in diapers. I was still in kindergarten.
All right. I was young enough that I could remember it. I could channel the ghosts of Chuck Fusina and Kelvin Bryant and remember how good the Philadelphia, and that's my problem. I remember the USFL. I remember how exciting the league was because they actually had an interesting game plan. They went after young college talent and said to them, no, you don't have to stay 4 years in college. They changed the rules. They did some radical stuff, got great young talent, and became a league that at least there was talk that, you know what, you could probably put 4 of these teams, take the best of the league, create 4 teams, there's your expansion. But think about all the talent that came out of there, from Jim Kelly to Steve Young to Doug Flutie, and the list goes on and on and on.
Oh, like you mentioned, the talent was there in the, the more I have gone back, YouTube is a great resource.
Oh, absolutely.
Looking at USL and everything else. But here's the thing, back then you didn't have your cable, your YouTube, your other internet forms of entertainment. And let's be honest, like you mentioned, we've had the XFL, we've had the AAF. And yes, those leagues, for one reason or another, hemorrhaged money. But here's the thing, they also drew fans. I'm sorry, the DC Defenders in the XFL, for a short period of time that team was around, I would argue that they drew just as well as the Washington Redskins / Commanders. There are people who wear DC Defender shirts around town.
I will defend your point even further with the Seattle Dragons. When their opening game, they had 48,000. I mean, they fell into something where, okay, they found some good target markets where Seattle proved to work. Even Birmingham with the Birmingham Iron, they were drawing around 20,000. Sure. So if you target the right markets, it can work. I think the problem is for the television contracts, you need to get the bigger cities. So you need something in LA, something in New York, or something in, the regions to please the Nielsen people, so to speak.
Yeah, but I mean, at the same time, you can, like the AAF, for what success they did have, in selling tickets. There were some smaller markets. For instance, a quarterback who went to Liberty here, Josh Woodrum, he had a cup of coffee in the NFL with Baltimore, with somebody else. He was the starting quarterback for the Salt Lake City Stallions. Boy, I hope I'm getting that right. I know it's Salt Lake, so we'll just do that. But, they drew 15,000 to 20,000 people for a game. And for an untested product in a city that does not usually participate in pro activities, they drew. Right. And that's the one area that I struggle to see a viable moving forward is, okay, so yeah, I'm obviously from the Philadelphia area, the Delaware area. I could tell you everything about the Eagles, Flyers, Sixers, but other than the quarterback for the Stars, who, by the way, I learned yesterday. Thank you, Mr. Scott. Other than that, I couldn't tell you one thing about this team. I couldn't tell. I have no passion behind it. And it's like the league is just banking on this nostalgia factor, which, you and you and I aren't the youngest kids in the block anymore.
No,
but quite frankly, you're relying on nostalgia from, 40 years ago that a majority of the people who are going to be watching this product weren't around for.
Right.
And so right now it almost feels like it's Fox's plaything, and it's like when they decide they've played with it enough, they're going to put it on the box, let it go, and maybe wait for the XFL to come back, which for whatever it's worth, at least has some more name recognition with modern audiences, and has proved to whatever degree that they can draw a little bit. And also, by the way, has The Rock as the owner now, so you're going to get a little bit of that star factor.
You got to look at the fact that Dwayne Johnson shows up at the Super Bowl. He's doing all the right things to try to get this thing marketing, trying to do some stuff with the NFL. It seems to me the key to this whole thing could be an NFL feeder league like NFL Europe was. Maybe that's the best option for spring football. But it also means that these NFL teams have to carry maybe a slightly longer roster, a slightly longer reserve list, where you're on the practice squad, and kind of say, okay, here's a 40-man roster. 10 of the team players on the roster being paid by NFL teams, which will control costs. And you target not necessarily the biggest markets, but markets where the fan base will be there. Well, we talked about Seattle, DC, Birmingham, where there's going to be enough of a draw that if you can control the salaries, have a decent enough television contract, no, you're not going to make a huge profit, but you're not going to lose your shirt either. So maybe getting the NFL involved may be the only path.
Yeah, I argue that having that pipeline or guaranteed future opportunity is really vital for any of these. I don't say minor league, but any of these secondary football leagues.
That's a great.
Even with the old XFL in the 2000s, showing that Tommy Maddox could go from the LA Extreme right to the Pittsburgh Steelers and go, wow, there is an opportunity. And people from the NFL are watching. I don't know what the ratings are for the USFL, but I couldn't tell you one person I have talked to or met that has watched a game, could tell me anything about a game, and has shown any interest in learning about the USFL.
That's the thing. I'm not getting the buzz either. I'm not feeling any buzz on this, where it's like I did hear they cracked 3 million on the first night game that they had, which is, in this day and age, that's not bad. That's not a bad audience, but is it enough that you can bank on it? Maybe not necessarily at a major network, but on a secondary network, sure. But again, it's still a matter of, like you were making a great example about Tommy Maddox, it's creating opportunities. But Tommy Maddox was the exception next to Rod Smart, a.k.a. He Hate Me, who became a very good special teams player for the Philadelphia Eagles, if I remember correctly. So, it's fascinating to watch. I love the idea of spring football. How viable it is, we don't know. Final quarter of this whole thing, and this one, I go to Dave's other half of his life. Because as a man who has worked in the game show world as the announcer of The Price is Right when I went on tour,
I'm ready.
You're going to love this.
Okay.
Because over the last few years, as you know, we have seen these game shows be rebooted.
Okay.
Match game, To Tell the Truth, Card Sharks, Press Your Luck, Supermarket Sweep, $100,000 Pyramid, The College Bowl, Name That Tune, and the celebrity version of the dating game.
Okay.
I'm sure you've watched a little bit, at least one episode of all these things. Which one of these reboots has at least had a little bit of appeal that you say, yeah, I could watch this a few more times?
Oh boy, there's so many on that list.
I know, but I figured there's got to be one or two that stand out. I mean, I'll bring up Supermarket Sweep in a second because you have a connection with that in a weird way. But out of all of them, because I mean, I've watched all of them. I mean, I don't think you can mess up the $100,000 pyramid anyhow. But Strahan's a very good host. That helps. Having a great host will help a show. If the host doesn't look comfortable or there's no connection going on, then I don't care how good the show is. The show's just not going to work.
Yeah, and Strahan has loosened up, and he's gotten better. Season 1 he was a little more stiff, but now he's flown with the celebrities. And the only thing that holds Pyramid back sometimes is if you watch those game shows from the '80s, some of those B or C list celebrities they would get to play, but man, they were good game players. They knew the rules. They could fire out words and this and that. And now you'll get some of these celebrities on who are, I don't think I've ever seen the show, and they're, it's like their agent just threw them in a seat, say, "You're making $1,000, kid. Sit there." It's.
I'm going to defend that point really well because last year I had the honor of interviewing Catherine Hickland here on my podcast, and Catherine was a, daytime soap opera queen, but she was also the queen of the game show. She had great success in the $25,000 pyramid. She became one of the elite celebrity players. So you make a great point. Back then, if you were a celebrity, you went on there. If you were good at it, you kept coming back and you became popular that way because you were such a great game player. And like you said, this generation kind of go, what?
Yeah, they look down on it to a degree. In fact,
I wish they didn't. Exactly.
I wish, the Pyramid got a brief revival on Game Show Network. And the best way I can explain it is I have a couple friends who worked on the staff of that and on the current version. One of the actors from the show New Girl on Fox got to be a celebrity contestant. And he had never seen a show, walked on the set, said, "I'll figure it out." And that poor contestant, I mean, in 30 seconds, I think they maybe got one word because he was going, I don't know, let me think about it. Tick, 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 tick. And the contestant's going, give me something, I mean, again, but bringing it back. So I do like the Pyramid. I do watch that from time to time. I think the two that have arguably had the best run, and I would love to say Match Game because I thought Alex Baldwin did a great job with that, but it's not coming back for another season. But the two I would argue have had the best run so far. Press Your Luck, which surprised me because I thought it was going to bank too hard on the nostalgia. But with the addition of the bonus game and Elizabeth Banks, I think has really impressed me as a game show host. I think they've done a great job on that. And the aforementioned Supermarket Sweep. Leslie Jones isn't everyone's cup of tea, but man, she's mine, and it is fun to watch.
She's great.
They've done a tremendous job with that.
It's interesting because I only recently found out about the history of Supermarket Sweep, and I'm surprised I didn't know this because I've talked with you, that if I can get photo number 10, and here's the guy from the 90s who was the epitome of Supermarket Sweep, David Brubeck. I mean, when you look at him, he really made that show. I didn't realize there was a 60s version where they were going from supermarket to supermarket.
Yeah.
And I caught it on YouTube, and I went, oh my God. And it was entertaining as hell. It really was great. And I love the concept of it where they're literally, we're coming to your town. And I'm like, at that time, I'm going, that's cool. And
can you imagine producing that in the 60s, by the way, with the level of technology they had?
They had the old school registers. I mean, it was so low tech. It's crazy.
My goodness. Well, I mean, the pilot of the Supermarket Sweep in the 80s was low tech as well. They actually David Ruprecht and I worked together in the game show industry for a little while, and he told me about it. They actually shut down like a Ralph's or something out in California and filmed it at like 2:30 in the morning. And the store owner said, "You have till 6 a.m. Go." And they're stringing lights up and they're doing whatever again. And I've seen the pilot, which is obviously the pilots are usually a little different,
right?
But they didn't get the lighting quite right, and so it's there, but it looks like they're filming a horror movie in the meat department. Which is just a little darker, a little creepier, and the aisles are smaller and tighter. You're expecting a guy with a chainsaw to run on the aisle. But they've just done such a tremendous job. And David Ruprecht was, man, what an amazing man. He got his big break in Hollywood by being in the final season of Three's Company. He was Joyce DeWitt's fiance.
Yeah, fiance became husband. That's how they wrote the final episode. That's right. I forgot about that.
Yeah, he would tell me stories about John Ritter and all the pranks he used to pull on the set. And oh man, Yeah, he was quite a character. Then a lot of roles as a co-star, guest stars on TV shows, and tremendous guy. I miss him. He's
You
still
have
he's
said
still
that he's just a really good person, really good guy.
Yeah, I can't say that about everyone I've worked with in the
That's
game
true.
show industry, but he is definitely even once my days in game shows ended, he and I still kept in touch for a while, and I know he's still doing this thing out in LA. And what a great man.
And by the way, if you're a fan of nostalgia, the Buzzer channel, which is on your cable system more than likely, this is actually the second highest rated show they have on there on the reruns, next to Match Game, Supermarket Sweep. And that's where I think the momentum of what's been happening on primetime has had people come back to the original. So I think it's great that we're seeing the old and the new have some success on television. So I'm sure David's getting a kick out of this. He has.
Oh, absolutely. And, like I said, I know Leslie Jones isn't everybody's comedic style, but I will say she is someone who appreciates the old version. In fact, David Ruprecht mentioned to me that she was actually supposed to be a contestant on the 80s, 90s version of Supermarket Sweep. The day of the audition, however, something happened where she had a health issue of something and she couldn't come to the audition. So the friend she was going to go on had to go with someone else, and then they ended up going on the show.
That's funny.
And she was always like, that was my one chance to get that sweater and everything. But they've taken the elements from the 80s, and they've had fun with me. Like they always had the dorky looking sweaters. We could say, they weren't.
As a matter of fact,
but now they style them up.
Put them up one more time to show the sweater, just because it's the truth. Oh no, that's right. He had the moment. I saw a photo of him in the sweater. I should have downloaded that one, but yeah, you're right.
Oh my God, the David Ruprecht sweaters. My gosh, you think Cosby had sweaters? Go back and watch Supermarket. Yes. He makes Cosby look like the clearance section of JCPenney, man. He was styling with all these sweaters. But then the contestants would also get these sweaters, and now in the new show they style them up and they have fun and they introduce some new elements. And I think the new show is fantastic. I really hope they continue that for a long time to come.
Dave, as always, a lot of fun. I'm glad we got 4 quarters in. Thank you so much for your time, brother.
I appreciate it, man. Let's not have another pandemic before we do it again. All right?
I agree with that wholeheartedly. Thank you. That's a wrap for this week. I'll be back next Sunday around 11:30 a.m. So join me here on the A Game. If you are not following my YouTube channel, please do that. And I do have a Facebook page, the A Game with Rob Akampora. Follow me there as well. Until next week, for Dave Walls, I'm Rob Akampora. Hey, take care. Have a great week ahead.